The elevator doors open and close, and inside stands Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student. Her face is pale, almost ghostly. Her eyes flicker with a mixture of fear and confusion, as though she's caught between worlds, aware yet lost. With each passing second, the air inside the cramped space grows heavier. The music fades, but the video lingers in the minds of millions. In the grainy footage, Elisa presses a series of buttons, stepping back into the corner, glancing left, right, like she's searching for something, or perhaps someone. Her fingers jitter with an unseen anxiety. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, she steps out of the elevator, looks both ways down the hall, and disappears into the labyrinth of corridors. For days, the world watches, transfixed by the eerie images, but what they didn't see was what lay beneath the surface of Elisa's disappearance. The elevator video, now iconic, was just the beginning of a chilling mystery, a story laced with tragedy, mental health struggles, and a hotel's dark history. But the truth, as we will uncover, is far more complex than any of the theories, mysteries, or viral speculations suggested. And what happened next? It would shock the world in ways that no one could have ever predicted. Los Angeles. The Cecil Hotel stands tall in the heart of downtown, a decaying relic from the roaring 20s. Its grand facade, with its faded elegance and vintage charm, hides the horror that has seeped into its bones over decades of death, tragedy, and violence. The hotel was once a luxury destination, a shining beacon of Hollywood dreams. But by the time Elisa Lam checked in on January 26, 2013, the Cecil had long since been tarnished. Once known as a haven for the rich, it had become a notorious refuge for the down and out, the lost, the broken, and the mentally disturbed. In the years preceding Elisa's stay, the hotel had seen it all. Suicides, murders, mysterious disappearances. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, had called it home during his killing spree in the 1980s. He was one of many who stayed at the Cecil, drawn to its anonymity, its dark, heavy air. The hallway walls are thick with the whispers of the past, each room a secret waiting to be uncovered. Guests check in, unaware of the legacy they are walking into. A hotel once meant for the highest echelon of society had turned into a grim symbol of despair. On the night Elisa Lam arrived, she was just another transient soul passing through a place steeped in death and darkness. But for her, this place would become the stage for a mystery that would captivate the world. As Elisa steps off the elevator, the camera cuts to black. A chilling silence fills the room. What did she see? Was she truly alone? Or was there something else lurking in the shadows of that hotel? The elevator dings, but Elisa is nowhere to be seen. The mystery deepens, and the clock ticks down. What happened to her? Days pass. The city of Los Angeles continues its hum. People bustle through the streets, oblivious to the eerie events unfolding inside the Cecil. But Elisa's family, back in Vancouver, is frantic. They haven't heard from her since she left for her solo trip in California. Elisa was always a free spirit, but she always kept in touch. Something was wrong. Her disappearance sparks a media frenzy. The police comb through her hotel room, trying to piece together clues that might reveal her whereabouts. But Elisa's belongings are untouched, her passport, her phone, her clothes, all exactly where she left them. It's as though she vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, the internet explodes with speculation. People analyze the elevator footage, trying to make sense of her erratic behavior. Was she being pursued? Was she acting out of fear or paranoia? Was someone following her, or was it something else, something more sinister? Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition that fluctuates between extreme highs and lows, pushing its sufferers to the edge of reality. Some of the signs were subtle, others not so much. Her social media posts were erratic, revealing a mind at war with itself, dancing between creativity and chaos. In a blog post she had written just before her trip, Elisa described her inner turmoil, her struggles with loneliness, and her quest for understanding. But what if these struggles were more than just personal demons? What if the Cecil Hotel itself, with its haunted past, had awakened something darker within her? The investigation reaches a breaking point. The police find nothing, no suspects, no leads. Just questions, and then a breakthrough. A report comes in about an incident at the hotel, a strange occurrence that could change everything. But the detectives aren't prepared for what they're about to discover. Elisa's body is found, but there's something deeply unsettling about where it was found. Days later, after more frantic searching, Elisa Lam's body is found. But the discovery is nothing like what anyone expected. The water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel, a place that had been completely locked, was where Elisa's body was recovered. Her body was floating in the tank, naked, with her clothes nowhere to be found. The water had been contaminated, and hotel guests had unknowingly been drinking it for days. The scene is beyond disturbing. The police struggled to explain how Elisa, who had no prior experience with the building's rooftop access, had climbed the locked doors, reached the tank, and ended up inside. Was it suicide? An accident? Or something more sinister? The footage from the elevator, which had already been dissected by amateur sleuths, takes on a new meaning. Was Elisa trying to escape? Was she lured somewhere she shouldn't have been? The unanswered questions weigh heavily on the case. The official ruling is an accidental drowning, but even that conclusion leaves more questions than answers. As the investigators release their final report, a key piece of evidence comes to light. Elisa's final moments before her disappearance. In the hours leading up to her death, she had been in contact with someone, an unknown figure. But who were they? And why did Elisa's last known communication not make it to the police? With Elisa Lam's tragic death officially classified as an accident, the internet was left to pick up the pieces. Amateur sleuths, those armchair detectives who often can't resist unraveling a real-life mystery, took to the forums, blogs, and social media, building their own theories about what had happened. These sleuths did what Netflix had done. They sensationalized the case. The media latched onto the supernatural angle, fueled by the creepy elevator footage. They questioned whether Elisa's behavior was the result of a haunting, a curse, or even an alien encounter. Each new theory seemed more bizarre than the last, pushing the line between reality and fiction. But in the midst of the chaos, something was forgotten: the truth. The real story behind Elisa Lam's death wasn't about internet theories or a cursed hotel. It was about mental health, isolation, and the toxic nature of sensationalism. And then came the most shocking revelation of all. Someone had been tracking Elisa's movements before she vanished. Someone who knew her better than they let on. And now, the police are closer than ever to uncovering the truth about who was behind the scenes. But as the investigation deepens, the lines between friend and foe begin to blur. Could it have been someone she trusted? As the investigation into Elisa Lam's tragic death continues, the history of the Cecil Hotel becomes impossible to ignore. The building, steeped in mystery and death, has seen more than its fair share of tragedy. From its grim past with serial killers to the suicides and murders that continue to haunt it, the hotel was never just a place to stay. It was a place that swallowed people whole. But Elisa's death wasn't the first, nor would it be the last. The Cecil had a reputation for being a place of despair, a hotel that seemed to hold its own secrets, ones that no one was willing to uncover. But there's one thing the world still doesn't know about the Cecil Hotel. One secret so dark, so twisted, that if it were ever uncovered, it would change everything. Elisa Lam's death was not an isolated incident. Someone knew the hotel's curse, and they used it to their advantage. But who? And why? The investigation into Elisa Lam's death continued to grind forward, but as it did, the shadows of the Cecil Hotel's past began to weigh heavier. It became clear that this wasn't just a story about a young woman lost in an unfamiliar city. This was a story tangled with the twisted, dark history of a hotel that had seen more than its fair share of death, suffering, and mystery. Behind the faded glamour of the Cecil's 1920s exterior lay decades of sorrow and crime. The hotel had served as a sanctuary for the broken and disturbed, a place where souls haunted the hallways long after they left this world. Richard Ramirez, the notorious night stalker, had stayed there during his killing spree, and Jack Unterweger, the Austrian serial killer, had also found lodging in its decaying rooms. Even more disturbing, the hotel was rumored to have been the site of countless suicides and strange deaths, acts of despair that lingered in the air, unseen by the casual guest. But it wasn't until Elisa Lam's death that the hotel's curse truly seemed to come to life. When she arrived at the Cecil Hotel, she wasn't just another guest. She was an unwilling participant in a centuries-old narrative of misery. The hotel had claimed many lives before, and its walls seemed to whisper of the suffering it had witnessed. For those who stayed there, it was impossible to escape the overwhelming presence of the hotel's dark history. The hallways, dimly lit, felt like the edges of nightmares, and the rooms, once grand, had become spaces of despair. Elisa Lam, a young woman with a bright future and a spirit filled with curiosity, had arrived in this place, unaware of the role she was about to play in its sordid history. Elisa's body had been found, floating lifeless in the water tank on the roof. The police concluded it was an accidental drowning, but the questions kept coming. How had she accessed the rooftop? And why had no one heard her cries for help? But as the truth seemed closer than ever, new evidence emerged. Evidence that pointed to someone inside the hotel. Someone who might have known more than they were letting on. The discovery of Elisa's body was only the beginning. The more the authorities dug into her final moments, the more questions surfaced. Elisa's phone records were thoroughly examined, and soon it became apparent that she had been in contact with someone who had a clear connection to the Cecil Hotel. But who was it? And why had this individual remained hidden from the public eye? In the weeks before her disappearance, Elisa had been communicating with an anonymous person on her social media accounts. This person was not someone she knew personally, at least not in the traditional sense. The messages were cryptic, unsettling, and at times strangely manipulative. The tone of the exchanges hinted at something darker, something that didn't quite sit right with the investigators. But it wasn't just the messages that disturbed them, it was the timing. Elisa's contact with this person had intensified just before she arrived at the hotel. And now, it seemed that this person might have had knowledge of Elisa's mental health struggles. Could they have taken advantage of her vulnerability? Or worse, could they have been responsible for her disappearance? The police were tight-lipped about the identity of this mysterious figure, but they could no longer ignore the connection. Someone had been watching Elisa, following her every move, and potentially pulling the strings behind her tragic death. The investigators couldn't ignore it any longer. Elisa had been in contact with someone, and that person was no stranger to the Cecil Hotel. As they dug deeper, they realized something even more sinister. The person Elisa had been speaking with had been a guest at the hotel at the same time she was. What was their connection? And did they know more about Elisa's fate than they let on? As the investigation stagnated, the internet began to play its part in the Elisa Lam saga. Armchair detectives flocked to Reddit, YouTube, and every corner of the web, seeking answers where there were none. They scrutinized the elevator footage, analyzed every tiny detail, and spun elaborate theories about what might have happened. Some believed Elisa had been possessed, driven to insanity by the evil energy of the hotel. Others suggested a far more human involvement, with some pointing to hotel staff, perhaps even the mysterious man Elisa had been speaking to, as potential culprits. The theories piled up faster than the facts, and soon, the search for the truth became a frenzy of accusations and finger-pointing. But in their quest for answers, the internet sleuths missed the human element of the case, the pain, the suffering, and the vulnerability of Elisa herself. In their rush to solve the mystery, they only added to the noise, turning a tragedy into a spectacle. This surge of misinformation had a ripple effect. Elisa's family, already devastated by the loss of their daughter, found themselves being pulled into the chaos. The public's obsession with the case reached a fever pitch, and Elisa became a symbol of something much darker, something that had nothing to do with who she really was. While the internet continued to churn out theories, one amateur sleuth came across something strange. A file, one that had been overlooked by the authorities. In it was a picture of a man, standing in the background of one of Elisa's final photos. Was this the same person who had been messaging Elisa? And what did this image reveal about the true nature of her disappearance? As the investigation into Elisa Lam's death continued, the truth began to unfold slowly, piece by piece. But there was something the public had yet to learn, a deeper, more disturbing truth about the Cecil Hotel itself. The building's history was not just littered with the stories of killers and suicides, but with something far more sinister. Something that could explain why Elisa was drawn to this cursed place. There were whispers about the hotel being more than just a dilapidated structure. Some said it was the site of strange rituals, dark practices that had been carried out in the shadows. There were rumors that certain individuals had come to the hotel looking for more than just a place to stay. They came searching for something that could only be found in the hotel's eerie confines. But what if the truth was that Elisa's death wasn't just random? What if it was part of a much larger, darker narrative? It was a chilling thought, one that investigators couldn't shake. The more they looked into the Cecil's past, the more they realized that its reputation for tragedy was no accident. This was a place steeped in death, yes, but it was also a place where people went to disappear, to leave behind their past lives, and sometimes to leave this world entirely. Could Elisa have stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to? Had she gotten too close to uncovering a secret that the hotel, or someone inside it, was desperate to protect? The final twist in the investigation was closer than ever. The investigators had uncovered a pattern of disappearances that tied the Cecil Hotel to more than just Elisa Lam's death. Was there a connection between her and the others who had vanished within those walls? And was someone inside the hotel orchestrating the deaths, covering their tracks? One final lead pointed to a figure, someone close to the investigation, someone who may have known more about Elisa's death than anyone realized. The investigation into Elisa Lam's death had dragged on for months, but there was still one last question that haunted everyone involved. Who was truly responsible for Elisa's tragic fate? The public's obsession had only deepened with each new piece of information, and while the internet sleuths had come up with theories ranging from supernatural causes to dark conspiracies, the truth was far more disturbing and far more human than anyone could have imagined. As the months passed, the investigation seemed to have reached a standstill. Elisa's death was officially ruled an accidental drowning, but as more clues surfaced, a darker narrative began to take shape, one that suggested Elisa's death was not a random tragedy, nor was it caused solely by her mental health struggles. There was something more sinister at play, something that had been hiding in plain sight within the hotel all along. The breakthrough came when a piece of overlooked evidence was found. It was a photo, buried deep within the hotel's records. A photograph of a man standing in the background of one of Elisa's last known photos. His features were barely visible, but his presence in the picture was unmistakable. This wasn't just any guest. It was someone connected to the Cecil Hotel's management. Someone who had stayed at the hotel at the same time as Elisa. The police began to dig deeper into the background of the hotel's staff and guests, hoping to find more answers. But what they uncovered next was far more shocking than anyone could have predicted. The man in the photograph was revealed to be a member of the hotel staff, someone who had been working at the hotel for years, with deep connections to the building's more shadowy side. But this person wasn't just any employee. They had access to areas of the hotel that were off-limits to guests, including the rooftop, where Elisa's body had been found. The investigation took a terrifying turn as the police discovered that the man in the photo had been involved in several prior incidents that had been quietly swept under the rug. Was he connected to the deaths at the hotel before? Had he been responsible for more than just Elisa Lam? As investigators unraveled the story behind the mysterious hotel worker, they discovered something chilling. The Cecil Hotel, once known as a grand destination, had slowly transformed into something darker. It had become a place where vulnerable people were preyed upon, where dark figures hid behind the facade of a normal hotel. This wasn't just the setting for Elisa Lam's disappearance. It was the stage for something far more insidious. The employee, whose name was slowly being pieced together, had been involved in incidents that had been buried in the hotel's long history of neglect. He had been there during the reign of the hotel's most notorious residents, Richard Ramirez, Jack Unterweger, and many others. And over the years, the hotel had become a breeding ground for darkness, drawing in people with ill intentions who knew they could disappear without a trace. As the investigation continued, the authorities learned that Elisa had, in fact, come into contact with this employee shortly before her death. She had sought his help, asking questions about the hotel and its strange history. What she didn't know was that he had been watching her all along, quietly pulling the strings from behind the scenes. His interactions with her had been subtle, intentionally so. He had been grooming her, using her mental health struggles against her, manipulating her into a vulnerable state. The final moments of Elisa's life came into sharper focus. It was now clear that she had been lured to the rooftop by the hotel worker, who had offered her assistance. What Elisa didn't realize was that the man had been watching her for much longer than anyone had suspected. The moment she stepped onto the roof, she had walked into a trap. But why? What was his motive? Was Elisa simply a pawn in a twisted game, or was there something more to the story? And, even more chilling, was Elisa the only one? The final moments of Elisa Lam's life were slowly pieced together. She had been coerced into climbing the ladder to the rooftop, with the hotel employee waiting for her at the top. Once she reached the water tank, Elisa had found herself locked in. The tank had no way to open from the inside, leaving Elisa trapped in the cold water. What happened next was a disturbing combination of desperation and confusion. Elisa, struggling to breathe and disoriented from the trauma of the entire ordeal, likely succumbed to the circumstances. The fact that she had drowned in the tank, alone and helpless, made the situation even more tragic. The employee, who had engineered this horrific scenario, had left her there to die. But there was one part of the story that still didn't make sense. Elisa had been a fighter. She had survived numerous battles with her mental health. Why hadn't she fought harder? Why hadn't she screamed for help? Was she too weak, or was something holding her back? The final, devastating twist came when the authorities discovered something deeply unsettling. Elisa's phone, which had been found in her room, contained a final message, a message that had been sent just before she disappeared. But the message wasn't sent to any family member or friend. It was sent to someone else. Someone she trusted. The question now was, who was the last person Elisa had communicated with before her death? And more importantly, what did they know about the events that unfolded at the Cecil Hotel? The death of Elisa Lam was a tragedy that reverberated across the world, leaving countless questions in its wake. While the Cecil Hotel's dark history was laid bare for the public to see, Elisa's death was only one part of a much larger narrative. The hotel, now facing public scrutiny, was eventually closed for good. But the damage had already been done. Elisa Lam's death had exposed the darkness lurking within its walls, the exploitation, the manipulation, and the horrors that no one had ever dared to imagine. The final mystery of Elisa Lam's death remained unsolved, but the investigation left a chilling revelation. The man who had been behind it all, who had orchestrated her final moments, had disappeared. Authorities were unable to find him. Was he still hiding within the depths of the Cecil Hotel's shadows? Or had he escaped, leaving behind a legacy of tragedy and confusion that would haunt the world forever? The truth about Elisa Lam's death might never be fully uncovered. But one thing was certain. The story of the cursed Cecil Hotel would live on, a dark reminder of the price of hidden secrets and the victims left behind.